Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the LegalEase Pod. My name is Kimberly Russell, and I'm an attorney and former journalist. And today I am joined by Ben Mullin, who is a current journalist at the New York Times. We are going to be talking about the threats that media is facing under the current Trump administration. Ben, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Kimberly. Thanks for having me.
Tell me about who you are and what your beat is at the New York Times.
I'm a media reporter for the Times, which means I basically follow the money in the media industry. I cover everything from local newspapers to major media conglomerates.
So, if we're watching and we don't have any concept of what that looks like, you would be covering something similar to Succession.
Yeah, exactly. Although I have yet to find a story that juicy.
I want to talk about why you're here today, which is to talk about how media is responding to the Trump administration and legal threats that they might be facing. You published a couple of stories. I want to talk about first your story about Paramount. Can you explain that broadly?
President Trump has sued Paramount, the parent company of CBS News, alleging that the network misled viewers when it deceptively edited an interview with then Vice President Kamala Harris before the 2024 presidential election. Paramount has called that lawsuit baseless, and many legal experts agree with them. President Trump has said on social media that he believes his case is a winner, and the two sides are locked in mediation to try to resolve the case out of court. Parallel to all this, Paramount is trying to merge with Skydance, which is a startup Hollywood studio. That merger is pending before the FCC. Many executives at Paramount believe its lawsuit with President Trump and the deal to merge Paramount with Skydance are somehow connected. That's a notion that President Trump has disputed, and the FCC has said that the two are not explicitly tied.
Have any of your sources indicated that there's some validity to the pressure from the FCC in this merger?
Well, some people we talk to believe the lawsuit is related to the merger. In other words, that the FCC will not greenlight a deal unless and until Paramount has reached a settlement with President Trump. However, there are many people we talk to who insist that the two things are proceeding along separate tracks. So it kind of depends on who you talk to. I will note that the FCC normally has a unofficial timeline of, I think, about 6 months where it reviews transactions and then either blesses them or intervenes in some way. This deal, I believe, has exceeded that half-year timeline between announcement of deal and closure. Many people are wondering what's taking so long.
You got a little bit of a shout out from the president on Social. Can you tell us a little bit about the context of?
Yeah, President Trump said on Truth Social that his case was a winner, disputing our characterization that many legal experts have said the case is baseless. And in response to his post, the Times said that the post is obviously the latest in a litany of legal threats the president has made against us and other independent news organizations. And the Times said that it would not be intimidated and would continue to pursue reporting that is essential.
Paramount has entered into mediation out of what they are saying and legal scholars are saying is a pretty baseless lawsuit. If it's baseless, why are they heading into mediation?
I've reported that the owner of Paramount Global, the controlling shareholder, Sherry Redstone, and executives believe it may be easier to settle the lawsuit than get drawn into a protracted legal battle with the sitting president. I think there's a belief on the part of corporate ownership that the lawsuit is a nuisance and it might be easier and less expensive to settle it than it would be to duke it out in the courts. And so I think that's some of the calculus that's driving the decision to enter into mediation. About 2 months ago, Sherry Redstone addressed Paramount's board, told them that she believed they should pursue mediation, and then withdrew herself from the boardroom deliberations over whether or not the case should be settled. And I think she did that in part because there could be a perception that she has a conflict of interest here, because if indeed it is true, which some executives believe, that a lawsuit is somehow connected to the FCC's review of a merger, then one could argue that she has an interest in seeing that case settled such that the deal can get consummated, a deal that she stands to benefit financially from. So I think that's one of the reasons why she's formally withdrawn herself after making that argument, the board.
What's going on with Paramount is a part of a broader trend of attack that we're seeing, or I say attack, but it's a broader target on the media. We talked before the interview about how the law and the practice of law is under a similar attack. The Trump administration has issued executive orders against big law firms. He's also given notices about investigating DEI practices. That's led to litigation against the Trump administration from law firms that are challenging it, like Perkins Coie, like Sussman Godfrey. You have law firms preemptively entering into settlement agreements so that they're not investigated over their DEI measures, like Kirkland and Ellis, Paul Weiss, Wilkie. You're seeing something that's similar playing out among media conglomerates. Can you explain to me about what's going on? And
So there have been at least two executive orders that I can think of that have targeted media companies or have had effect on media companies. The first, I think, is the executive order around DEI, including NPR, the Walt Disney Company, which owns ABC News, and Paramount, have changed their DEI practices to respond to that EO. In some cases, it means changing DEI in name only and using words like belonging. The other executive order that has had a direct effect on the press has been the one announced last week by President Trump targeting PBS and NPR. Essentially, it says that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and government agencies should not fund PBS or NPR directly or indirectly. This is part of a wider portfolio of executive orders that have targeted a bunch of different firms across many sectors of the American economy.
what are you seeing media leadership doing to protect themselves in this new environment?
Sometimes it means making sure in their mind that they're in compliance with these new executive orders. And as I mentioned, sometimes that means relabeling or canceling existing programs related to DEI. In some cases, though, you've seen media leaders push back. NPR and PBS, in the wake of President Trump's executive order, have said that they would fight that EO, and some experts expect they might do so through the courts. When a White House official last week sent an email to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funds both PBS and NPR, saying the president was terminating 3 members of its board of directors, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting sued to block that move. So there's been kind of, I think, 2 paths that companies have taken.
It's a similar fight between law firms and what's happening with media conglomerates. Either people are fighting or who are trying to make a deal, but one way or the other, we're trying to comply, whether we're going down with a fight or we're entering into a deal. I've co-authored a couple of amicus briefs in lawsuits against the Trump administration on behalf of solo practitioners and small law firms. And the basis of our amicus brief was to basically say, if you're going after these large law firms that have all these resources and you just allow this to happen, then when it gets to little guys like us who don't have $1 billion worth of pro bono hours to devote to the administration because we're practicing something like immigration law or criminal defense or something that the administration finds politically unfavorable to them, you're undermining the entire rule of law. There's this interest of everybody, whether you're the biggest law firm or solo practitioner in the smallest county of the United States, that we preserve protections for attorneys and the rule of law to remain adversarial to the government. Are you seeing a similar attitude among reporters, or is it focused just on the media companies?
I have heard from some reporters who have wondered whether their parent companies are up to doing adversarial reporting of the Trump administration in light of the pressure that's being exerted on media companies. None of those people work at the New York Times. I think that we're somewhat lucky that we have an owner who takes a long-term view and lawyers who support that. But without a doubt, there has been a chilling effect among reporters that I talk to who are concerned their reporting could be shut down.
Are they worried about being targeted individually at all, or are they more worried that their reporting would contribute to a targeting of the company?
I think the concerns are less about the fact of personal risk or monetary loss on the part of those reporters and concerns that they might not be able to do their job effectively because their bosses are worried about lawsuits. I think it's less about the lawsuit itself and more about the fact that they might not be able to report what they think should be reported.
Where do you see all of this in the landscape of First Amendment rights and journalism and being able to investigate, and be the watchdogs essentially? Where do you see all of this heading now?
I think it's possible that many of these questions could be resolved if the Supreme Court takes up a case that deals with New York Times versus Sullivan, which is one of the landmark cases that has implications for how the First Amendment is applied to media companies. That case basically said that media companies, when covering public figures, had to be shown to be acting with reckless disregard for truth for plaintiffs to win a case. And that's a high bar for plaintiffs to meet. If that were dismantled by a Supreme Court ruling, it's likely much easier for plaintiffs to win a case against media companies reporting on the news of the day.
Regardless of where they stand on challenging the EOs in court, or if they're entering mediation or whatever else the approach is, or merely changing the name of DEI to something else, these companies are changing the course of business that they would normally do before the Trump administration, right?
Oh, yeah. Whether it's changing the name of DEI or universities changing their policies or some big law firms announcing these deals, you're seeing companies behave in ways they wouldn't normally if Trump had not been elected president.
How much of this is par for the course for a new administration, and how much of this is unprecedented or shocking?
That's a really good question. And I don't want to say it's without precedent because there have been precedents in the annals of press history. When John Adams was president, the Alien and Sedition Acts were used to prosecute journalists. I believe there was a similar effort in the early 1910s with the Espionage Act. President Obama prosecuted many leakers during his administration. So I don't want to say that this is unprecedented because the press has always been subject to pressure by the people that they scrutinize. I think what's different here is the overt demonization of the people and institutions in the press. I think maybe the best corollary was Ronald Ziegler, Richard Nixon's White House press secretary, criticizing the Washington Post from the pulpit during coverage of Watergate. But this time around, President Trump and officials in his administration are scapegoating the entire press corps. That feels unusual, this idea of demonizing the idea of professional scrutiny of the White House.
There's this movement of not trusting established media and wanting to get news solely from independent media, whether it's left wing or right wing independent media. It's a real thought process. I will tell you a story. I went out on a date with this guy. He said that I should never get my news from the news, that I should not be watching CNN, that I should not be reading the New York Times, that I should only be getting it from podcasts. To me, the daughter of investigative journalists and somebody who used to be a journalist, it was pretty shocking to me that people have that belief and not just kind of believe it, but are dug in. Where do you think that mistrust is coming from, and how can we gain some of it back?
I had a similar experience, not on a date, but when I was in DC for White House correspondence, on the cab ride back to the train station, the Uber driver was telling me that he thought that media was fundamentally biased and we just made things up. And I'm a pretty agreeable person, and I'm not one to make an issue of something over a brief conversation for somebody that I'm just going to see once. But I felt I needed to say something. We ended up having a conversation about why he distrusted the media. He cited Dan Rather and CBS News errors over President George W. Bush's war record and Brian Williams's remarks over, I guess people call it Choppergate, when he said that something happened that he wasn't directly a witness to. I think there have been self-inflicted errors by the press over the years, and that hasn't helped us. I also think there's been a concerted effort among people in politics to use the press as a foil or a hate object to advance their own interests. It's a combination of those two things. I think the only thing we can do is acknowledge mistakes when they're made, be as transparent as we can about where information comes from, and to keep reporting the truth. I mean, many people are critical of the press for not reporting aggressively enough on President Biden's infirmities before he left office. Alex Thompson, who was a reporter for Axios, who won an award for his scrutiny of President Biden, said during that same weekend that he thought that the press had let people down. But during the last 3 or 4 years, the New York Times and many other organizations ran stories about President Biden. And so I think that sometimes criticism of quote unquote the media fails to encapsulate the entire body of work that's being done.
That makes sense. People make mistakes. You have to issue retractions. You have to issue corrections. That's a normal part of journalism. But I think owning it and recognizing we are mere mortals is a part of regaining trust. What advice might you have for companies that are facing scrutiny from the Trump administration?
When I was at Dow Jones, which publishes the Wall Street Journal, my first day, I got a hour-long briefing by the company's lawyers on what I should do and what I shouldn't do. And that was incredibly useful and probably got me out of a lot of hot water. If you're a company that has media lawyers, get them in touch with your reporters on the front end before they make mistakes. If you're a reporter or an editor at a company that has media lawyers, listen to your lawyers.
If you're a startup and you don't have lawyers yet, look into fractional general counsel. If you want to get with lawyers before you need them, that's always the better time to talk with us because we can strategize better. Do you have any other words of encouragement or anything else you want to mention?
One thing I've noticed is that as it relates to press freedom in the United States, the First Amendment has held up pretty well. The courts have been rigorous and the law in this area has been durable. There's a lot of pressure with litigation financing. More companies are being hauled into court for what they say and report. Just report the news accurately without fear or favor. If you do your job rigorously, the law is on your side.
I think that's a great piece of advice. I know that there's a lot of concern across industries, especially in the legal industry, for this. The times are shaky. Like it's you're seeing a lot of stuff that we haven't seen before, and there's constant evaluation of how much of this is unprecedented, how much of this is par for the course, and where do we sound the alarm? Where are we at risk of losing our fundamental civil rights? Having confidence in the fact we've had these rights for 250 years now, and it's held up is something to have some confidence in. And you have people like you and me who are doing the work to hold everything up.
Can't see, but I'm knocking on wood here.
That's it. Do you have anything else you want to share with us? Anything you want to plug?
The best way you can support My reporting is by subscribing to the New York Times.
Yes, the New York Times is a fabulous institution. I subscribe to them. Their reporting is really in depth, and I get a lot of their news on the app. They had a great piece the other day showing an animation of immigration.
Plus Wordle. I mean, that's what people really pay for.
What is Wordle and cooking? There are a lot of great recipes. Well, Ben, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate it. Would love to have you back on again in the future. We appreciate all you're doing for the American public and journalism.
Thanks for having me, Kimberly.
Talk to you soon. And thanks everybody for joining. Like and subscribe. See you next time.